And are you doing a backup recording on a cell phone? Or something else?
Yeah. Should I do a cell phone recording right now?
Please, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Business issues. Those of you who are graduating this spring need an exam or paper deadline a little earlier. Swenmio suggested mentioning if you may want to change your mind, you could take the exam instead of a paper. The format of the exam is normally written during the class time, not starting and ending at the class time. And then it's been maybe a list of 6 IDs and you write about three of them. And then second, just do an essay on one of the 2 questions for the exam. The deadline for graduating seniors is really next week. So if anyone wants the exam or to have a grade from the paper for graduation this spring, the paper deadline is Thursday. Thursday, let's say Thursday, 6 p.m. please. What's that date? Today is just back up here. Today's the 18th. Thursday is May 27. For papers due if you're graduating, and I should say, well, no, you're all here, I think. Okay. Who is interested definitely in the exam, or is there anyone else who might want to do the exam instead of a paper? Just look here. I'm looking if we have any hands up. I don't see any hands.
I think earlier in the quarter you had suggested doing both. Is that still something you'd suggest, or do you think it would make more sense to choose?
Yeah, no. Yes, I'm sorry. Good point. Both is really the best for everybody. We could get by on just the exam or the paper, but certainly it's better and encourages better participation for everyone to do both. And Wenbin, you're the only one who's not doing a paper at this point? Okay, and everybody else is planning on the paper. Okay, great. So Wenbin or how many others tentatively want to take the exam as well?
So Professor, so Wenbin is going to graduate this quarter, right? But the rest of us say we may not graduate this quarter.
No, but I think there are a few people who wrote that they are graduating this quarter. Can you raise your hand if you are? And so that is you need to submit your paper earlier if you need. Okay, Jean-Tan. Okay, so did I say the paper deadline for if you're graduating is 6 p.m. May 27. And Wenbin is, you're graduating also this quarter, is that right? Yeah, so we need to correct the exam and get it in. Then when is the exam? What could we do with this work for? Yeah, Chantal, do you have your hand up for a question? Your camera.
I'm okay. Yeah, I raised my hand because I say I graduate like this quarter. Yeah.
Okay, so Chantal, so are you the only two then who are graduating this quarter?
I am as well.
Okay, so 3. So that's. Okay, graduating spring. And Teo Evans, are you taking the exam too?
I think I'm writing the paper.
Okay, so you say both or only?
Do you know when the exam will be?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about that right now. So if the, what is, how is Thursday at class time? No, if we do it, well, we have class for everyone on the 9th. How is Thursday, say, 6 p.m. May 27?
I actually have the class at a similar time on Thursday.
Okay, so
And I
that's,
saw the deadline for submitting the grade is June the 6th, so we have another week.
let me check, but I don't think so. Let me check here. I just sent this out for the class. Graduating students 6/6. Yeah, the 5 p.m. So yeah, I have to get in the grades by June 6th. So but I have to read, and I've got also another class with a bunch of students many students who are graduating this quarter. So what time is your class over on Thursday? Wenbin?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. Would 8 o'clock work?
Starting from 8 o'clock.
So starting from 8 o'clock, that is, I mean, it's getting later, but if later is better, is later better or earlier better for you?
Oh, later is better.
Later is better. Okay. Well, why don't we then say exam? You maybe 9. You want 9 instead? Because but you could then have. Are you in the U.S. or internationally?
I'm in China right now.
You're in China. So is I'm just trying to make it as comfortable as we can for you. So if you want time to recover and eat from your other class, then later is better. The class time is roughly 3 hours. So if you start at 9, that would go until midnight Chicago time. Is that good for you and maybe for Teo? Okay, let's say 9 to 12 p.m. Thursday, May 27. Okay. All right. Onward. How many of you have questions about your papers that you'd like to discuss today? Lena sent in a revised version, and I'm still waiting for you to just send me your a version with which shows your changes. And if you could send that, we can talk about that today. Does anyone else have questions on the paper, either specifically for your paper or adapting what I said more generally about hypotheses and so forth? We had a good session with the two Teos, Theo, a couple of days ago, and just talked about Blaylock a bit, which was a concern for them. Does anyone else have questions you'd like to talk about like that? A lot of you, none of you, or just that is, we could reserve time for that today if this is an issue for several persons. Okay, so Theo again. I'm looking for any other hand. Okay, so only Theo. All right.
No, I would also appreciate to talk about the paper.
Okay, Lena, yeah. Can you send me your changes? before
It's
we-
like everything is like it's
No,
like the whole paper is still, but I'll try to summarize it.
No, just do it, run track changes in the Word program. Yeah, let me say, this is for everybody. You've all done 5 pages. I've read your 5 pages very carefully, and we've talked about them. If you have 1 line or 5 pages, please send me a comparison showing how those 5 pages are still there or not there in your final paper. That is, I just don't want to read the 5 pages again. That's the reason. Now, do you all have access to the MS Word program, which can run what's called track? You can use either track changes or compare documents is the other one. If you compare your final paper with the proposal, it will then show which lines are repeated and which are new. Is that something you can all do, or is that a problem for anybody? But please raise your hand if you can do this. No, okay, see 1 hand raised, 2 hands raised.
Just a question, sorry. So you want to see a comparison when we turn in everything for the final?
Yeah, it's turn in the final without the comparison, turn in the comparison as a separate file. So the final one doesn't have the comparison. So this is standard procedure when we're co-authoring with people and so forth. And it's good for you to see how this is more efficient. That is, we want to be able to see what's new in each draft. And we go through drafts, 30, 40 drafts with co-authors on big papers and books and stuff. Okay. Is that clear? That is, you submit with your final paper, the final paper itself, and second, a comparison of the final paper with the 5 pages which you submitted before. Okay. And using the MS Word program, does anybody not have access to something like the MS Word program, which will do this? There are probably other programs that do the same, but can everybody do this with MS Word? Okay, so Gia, your hand is not raised, I don't think. Or Yiling, we don't see your face today. I'm trying to get a sense, what can we do? If this does not work for me, tell me what you can do that does the same thing and send it in advance, and I'll review it if you have an alternative program or methodology. But speak, please. Tell me what the problem is. Do you not have the Word program, or what?
It works for me.
Okay, it works for you. Okay, that's great. Lena, you have MS Word? Lena?
Yeah, so I've never done like the comparison, but I'm figuring it out right now, so
Okay.
it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, great. And Taylor, you know all this. Teo Evans.
That works for me.
And Shanto? Is this a problem for you?
I don't think so. I can figure it out. Yeah.
Okay, but you have MS Word?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yiling?
Yes, it works for me. And I also have a MS work. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so it works for everybody. All right, let's push on.
I have an administrative question, sorry. For those of us graduating in August, is there a date for the paper?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is the quick answer. Because I'm officially out of residence, not teaching during then. So I'd say, don't ask me just a day before, because you may not get an answer. So I'd say let's start well before and try to get this figured out. And I think normally in most, well, each program is different. I shouldn't try to generalize. So you're almost all in maps, so that ought to be more straightforward. Okay, I'm pretty sure the maps people will flag you and me and can tell us, but I don't know is the answer. Anything else?
So essentially it wouldn't be like next week, right?
No, it'd be in mid to late summer, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So we've got a couple of papers which we can talk about today. And we have, to introduce the readings, we have Teo Evans, and we're going to let him lead off. Then I have a PowerPoint and a video which we can draw from as appropriate, contingent on what Teo says, and then I may talk a little bit and then bring in more. So Teo, you want to lead us off, please?
Yeah, so I'll be walking us through the Scenescapes readings, which are an examination of the scenes that form everyday social environments. And they define scene as the aesthetic meaning of a place. So that definition includes both scenes formed around shared interests, so things like the jazz scene or the punk scene, as well as scenes based around places, so like the Hyde Park scene or Wicker Park scene. And in either case, the chapter suggests looking at a scene like a director, painter, or poet to see what people are doing, how they're behaving, and especially what moods or styles are expressed by the scene. And I think that sort of a central move of the first chapter is to denaturalize scenes to some extent. So we experience scenes in our everyday lives, but rather than taking them for granted, they suggest we understand it as remarkable that not only these scenes exist, but that we can recognize them, distinguish between them, and we know how to behave differently within different scenes. And they also suggest that scenes have become increasingly relevant in the 21st century because of factors like the welfare state, market individualism, tolerance of variation, and cultural pluralism, which are in a diagram in the first chapter. And that this has allowed for a greater ability to identify and realize desires or preferences. So people are more able to select the scenes that they want to participate in or move between different scenes, which gives analysis of scenes increasing relevance. And they also outline some effects of that shift that are relevant in studying scenes. So the first is residential effects, because leisure has become a more important consideration in deciding where to live with things like arts, entertainment, and recreation. The second is economic effects, as aesthetic qualities of products are refined through scenes. And the third was political effects, as cultural consumption and lifestyle have increasingly become political issues. And then chapter 2 looks more at the cultural elements or what they call scene dimensions that make up a scene. And there are a few different metaphors or analogies that they used for these that I thought were interesting. So one is the periodic table, so grouping and organizing the cultural elements. And the other was Wagner's leitmotifs, like we've talked about earlier in the class, which they draw on to emphasize different resonances or meanings that scene dimensions take on in combination with each other. And they have 15 dimensions, which are grouped in 3 different categories. And I won't go through the 15 dimensions one by one, but the 3 sort of overarching categories are authenticity, theatricality, and legitimacy. And they note that each of these have been significant facets of existing social theory. So we've read some of Weber's discussion of legitimacy, which they define as involving how right and wrong are determined. And they also mention Goffman's discussion of theatricality and symbols of authenticity. And then within each of those categories, there are 5 more specific dimensions. And a few aspects of those dimensions that I think are worth noting. One is that they're relational, so they can be defined against each other. So one example that they give is transgression, which is, or transgressive theatricality is defined against the mainstream or convention. And they also note that the dimensions don't need to be accepted by everyone in a scene. So one example that they give is that some citizens might reject state authenticity or patriotism, but they note that all scene dimensions have critics and supporters, so they're not homogeneously accepted by the people in a scene. And scenes, they also emphasize, are combinations of various dimensions, so they're not just defined by one dimension. And those are the 2 chapters that I think were the main focal readings. And then I also looked at chapter 6. So should I touch on that one too?
Oh, sure. This is great. Just a little bit on 6 would be fine.
Okay. So chapter 6 was looking at the role of scenes in political life, and showing how these cultural dimensions affect politics and political movements. So they discuss political fights to maintain a scene, or political conflicts over which cultural dimensions to pursue within a scene. And let's see, where are my notes? And they relate this to the new political culture, as we've read about earlier in the quarter, shift towards fiscal conservatism and social liberalism. And they suggest that one reason that lifestyle and social issues have taken on more political weight is because of the new political culture. Another concept that I think is important in this chapter is buzz, or the energy and excitement that's generated by scenes. And they discuss buzz as a resource that can be used in a variety of ways. So it could be used to make money, or it could be used to mobilize a group of people, or as a rhetorical political tool. And buzz also can give new groups access to power. For example, young artists who may not have many resources otherwise. And they emphasize the importance of the cultural dimensions in addition to existing political categories like race, age, and class. So one example that they use is that communities with high rent, so upper class and low transgression, tend to be more Republican, whereas communities with high rent and high transgression tend to be more Democrat. And one question I had here that I think is relevant to Tayo and I's research in particular is just whether we're seeing a shift in that linking of transgression with transgression as like a democratic value, and that I think in recent years we've seen more of sort of a transgressive aesthetic among conservatives or Republicans. So that was something that I was interested in.
That's it.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I
Okay, I mean, that was very crisp, very succinct, but right on target, very well done. I don't have anything really to disagree with. Maybe a qualification which could resolve your point at the end that in recent years we have, yes, changes on all kinds of things. There are continual changes on all of these. But the general point which we're trying to suggest is to look for not just historic journalistic description or saying things are new or different, but to try to see why and how to link them to other combinations of the more general. These are, in a sense, middle level concepts and dimensions. They're not very, very abstract. We start maybe with theatricality and legitimacy, but we get down to the 15. And what Theo did not mention is that we go down then to qualitative data. We have about 100 little boxes of case studies of all different kinds of things in the book. And then we also have 12 years of data accumulation and analysis, which was a huge job to get data for every US zip code, 45,000 zip codes, from the census, from downloading about 400 yellow pages and census items over 20 plus years. For the census items, just 1 year was available for the for the yellow pages. But we have, for instance, the ancestry background of, do Polish people go to Polish restaurants and think and talk in a more personalistic way based on measures we have of those scenes? So we can combine the scene characteristics with activities in ways that are, that ideally we will have the subtlety of an ethnography, but the big data which is available to permit one to talk about up to 400 dimensions of that scene which we are considering. So we can both do this with textual social media comments of the participants themselves and ourselves, as well as have numbers and do multiple regressions and hierarchical linear modeling and other kinds of statistical analysis. And we combine these all together, chapter by chapter. We try to keep the text fairly straightforward. The more technical things are in the notes and appendices and in the chapter called The Science of Scenes at the end. Okay, that's the overview. Anybody have a question there, or I can give you a bit. That is, I have a version. I have two versions of this, which we can show you bits of. One is a PowerPoint, and with the PowerPoint, I have some text which I used with a European meeting just a couple of months ago. And it updates, it talks about more general things which are changing, some of which we've had in the course. But any questions at this point, or comments, things to talk about, if not just a question? Criticisms or potential criticisms? Okay, why don't we do a bit of the Wenmeo, if you could try to show a bit of the start of the video, because this talks about some of these issues more abstractly and shows how, especially dealing with some new issues. And then we can, yeah, this woman has a long introduction about, which we can skip. Well, I'm overwhelmed by the thoroughness and kind words which you have offered. Yes, I bike every other night, and that keeps me active during COVID. And I suggest it to anyone who is suffering by wearing masks and so forth. That's a great way, and you can keep distance and keep fit. So I love it. And I would say, yes, it's true. That's how I've learned a lot, often with students, neighborhood experts who will bike around, and Forrest Stewart, others, many students, and I have spent hours in this way. I do tours as well for students and faculty once a year, and we stop and have 3 of us comment on the different things which we look at, which is a great way to see your city and you can do this in any city of the world. So keep it in mind. I also have continually learned by working from these colleagues that the core ideas of scenes and many of my books are almost everything I co-author, and this grows out of genuine continual learning from people from around the world. I consciously try to work with people from different places. I have teaching assistants who are especially from China these days, or for the last 30 years, I've tried to learn more about China because I'm not a China expert, but I want to compare with some of the critically very different locations. So with that background, I would say that has led me to be more conscious of the interpenetration between the world we live in and how our theories are evolving, particularly since 1968 and 1989, we see complex confrontations among citizens, civic groups, unions, and traditional political parties. New types of groups and political leaders press for more ambitious policies like diversity and immigrant rights, and the new social movements of environmentalists, feminists, human rights paved the way in the 1970s, but in the 21st century went much further after Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State occupied movements from Wall Street to hundreds of other cities, the fall of national leaders in Cairo, Kiev, and more, with repercussions from Buenos Aires and Hong Kong. The new movements of many of the other subpopulations implement protests, parades, demonstrations with puppets and poets, songs, dances created and directed carefully for videos of mass and social media. The Hollywood-style destruction of the World Trade Center and similar Parisian events orchestrated violence theatrically. These created new, powerful scenes for cities and the world. Political responses to these include new populist leaders from Greece and Brazil, the Philippines, Kiev, to Mayor Ford of Toronto and Donald Trump. What do sociologists say about all this? As analysts, not just as moralists or voters, theories of the crowd in the 19th century remain underdeveloped. We sociologists study many subjects, but sociological journals regularly use the same key explanations for many things: race, class and professional activity, gender, and nationality of origin are the 4 essential characteristics to explain dozens of topics from participation to happiness. The mass media mobilize these 4 with specific events, but look more closely at all the social science journals for the precise power of these factors, individually and combined, and the 4 seldom explain more than 15% of the variations within a country. This means that 85% of the variance remains unexplained. These points are detailed in my books, The City as an Entertainment Machine and The New Political Culture. Alas, the modesty of these results are largely ignored by many talented commentators, such as Pierre Bourdieu and Jean-Claude Passeron in Les Héritiers and Distinction, or Paul DiMaggio, Sharon Zukin, and many more. We live in a highly probabilistic and weakly deterministic world, especially comparing nations. Thus, studying cities and neighborhoods is a great way to analyze and sharpen these subtleties. As I scanned the abstracts for this conference, all of them, I was delighted to see much attention to new topics and processes beyond the traditional: public art, public space, creative placemaking, new migration dynamics, neighborhood dynamics are all here in this conference in Bologna, or wherever we're connecting through to this. In this same spirit, my first goal here is to offer a list of concepts which can help us to specify dynamic urban processes. Second, to sketch an approach which may join many of these more specific processes. And third, present some results comparing cities around the world. This approach is called the scene. It seeks not to replace, but to add to classic concepts like race, class, gender, and thus enrich the social science toolbox. Since the uprisings of 1968, the fall of the Berlin Wall, Tiananmen protests in 1989, the world has deeply changed. Yet many social scientists still teach as if we only had Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emil Durkheim. And urban theorists like Simmel, the Chicago 20s, ecologists, the early Castells, Logan and Molich's Urban Fortunes. The American urbanists on the ComUrban ASA server are behind you Europeans at this conference. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to learning more as I participate at a distance. How to update our theories: about half, how and why. Half the manual labor force has disappeared since the 1950s in Europe, in America, in the sense that the labor forces of workers everywhere have dropped. It's become not manual. This, of course, challenges the Marxist analysis of industrial society. Marxists loosely or broadly, we live in an increasingly post-industrial world with new roles for cities. Students are the new proletariat. Creativity, ideas, and culture have become essentials. We have to catch up to the public, the journalists, and some urban political leaders who are building better than we are on 68 and 89. So are Chinese designers. Korean and Japanese cultural policies are transforming Asian export production economies and central planning to a new focus on consumption through the arts, directly targeted by strong governments. In China, mass urban-rural migration is not motivated by employment alone. Younger people in Asia challenge the family and other hierarchies. The urban scenes of big cosmopolitan cities attract the young and talented. The city of Beijing is seriously pursuing nightlife as a new urban policy type. They can learn from the Spanish, among others. New issues such as limiting environmental pollution, dealing with flood victims, combating corruption transform the focus on economic growth. In Southern Europe, where Roman law and the Catholic hierarchy were the sources of many theorized past models, Frankfurt was seen as new. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, one day as a student in Frankfurt, I heard Adorno tell the class, "You felt Hitler's boot," but Horkheimer and I went to the United States where it was even worse. People there did not realize they were forced to smoke cigarettes, to see Hollywood movies, to ride in big cars and lead a lifestyle imposed by advertising. Their famous Hollywood article uses these same themes. Remember, though, that the second face of Adorno is that of a subtle, critical, and nuanced atonal composer of music. I propose that we pass over the first Adorno and extend or try to extend the second. We must introduce the aesthetic and emotional power of the arts into our central thinking to better interpret how cities and citizens do so today. Why did Adorno stress advertising because it makes a direct link between capitalism and the consumer. It destroys consumer autonomy and individualism, even though these were introduced by Walter Benjamin with the flaneur as a causal social engine. Benjamin's in-depth study of Paris has global significance today in our post-industrial era. His Paris is still an answer to many questions. What to do? Add shopping, entertainment, consumption, lifestyles, cafes, and the poetry of that is revelatory, which for Benjamin was Baudelaire, who distilled these elements of street life. The recognition of Benjamin as the leader. Let me switch, and I'll try to turn on begin with some of these PowerPoints that I have here, so you can get a flavor of this. Where am I? Here we go. Share this. All right. Do you? You see here some of the important collaborators who are actively engaged with the scenes materials. Wait, does this? No, you don't. This says scheduling made easy. Something's wrong here. Oh dear, I thought I had this all smooth. Try to turn that on. Okay, let me stop share. Try that again. Screen sharing. Here we go, Microsoft PowerPoint, ESA. Why don't we stop here for a second, Mio? Let's, no, okay, here we go. I was just gonna say we can, questions, discussion about anything that I'm saying here would be fine to go over and to try to look for any ways that would be useful for you to use in your own questions, papers, or whatever.
One question, I don't know if it would be better to wait at the end, so I'll ask it now, but we could always get back to it. But would there be a way to think about scenes in terms of social media, for example, online communities in particular? I mean, even before the pandemic, given that a lot of, for example, my interest and Teo's interest lies in communities of people that meet online through, say, specific media streaming platforms that they could find online with, far-right individuals, or men's health self-help communities, or 4chan, 8chan, different kinds of platforms. And I'm wondering how we could make that step from this aesthetic aspect of scenes that are located in physical place and in the city to, this different interactional dimension.
Analytically, it's easy as pie to state, as you've said, and just say, we'll just connect the people who are talking on their iPhones, on their cell phones, with the location of the person, when and where they're speaking. So if we had those data, and for some purposes we do, then you can do it immediately with the raw data. However, in general, that is not available. So that is, you can't get and especially with all these concerns for preservation of anonymity, confidentiality, so that in countries like China, where you have more shared data and there's much less concern about privacy, this is possible, or at least almost possible. Not with all sites or many different media sites, but so you have papers that have taken the one or the other. That is, you have people who are either doing surveys of the whole US population and publishing that, but that they're only representative of the whole US citizenry. If you want to join the views of citizens, like how fiscally conservative and socially liberal are they, then and you want to combine that with neighborhood data or people in Hollywood compared to Pacific Palisades, which tends to be different socially and politically. In that way, the direct data are not available generally for the US. However, you can sometimes, for some purposes like Twitter, which is more generally publicly available, in contrast to Facebook, which is not, for instance, you can get an average for a smaller unit. So in brief, we're working actively right on what you're talking about, especially Dan Silver, and Dan has a separate project with computer science folks in Europe and the US, and has published a couple of papers doing some things exactly like this. But it's a lot, but because the data are so massive, it's a lot easier to do it for one city at a time. So they have a paper in the Urban Affairs Review last summer that is for London, Toronto, and New York, I guess. Okay, or no, Chicago. Yeah, London, Chicago, and Toronto. And it's got what just one quick finding from that, they showed that when you model down to the voting district level, the voting districts and their characteristics of people who elected Lori Lightfoot are very different from those of African-American political mayoral candidates in the past. She has a different electoral base that put her into power, although now she's working out with various, obviously, other participants. So yes, indeed, we should be doing this. And yes, indeed, social media are dramatically more important for some groups in some cities, and including many so-called less developed countries. But when you have something like a 70% cell phone access in China, including the rural areas, it's not as if this is a huge poverty barrier the way it was just 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, let's look through a few of the, or sorry, Teo, is that enough of an answer, or that is, you framed it as a general question? Anything more specific on that?
I'll think if anything comes up from that, but yeah, that was generally the answer to the question I asked. Thank you.
Okay, let's just scroll down. Some of these can go pretty fast, but let's give you an overview of some of this, complementing what we already heard. So okay, slide, there we go. The recognition of Benjamin as the leading intellectual of Weimar and Baudelaire, the most respected model of late 19th century France, suggests the deterministic social theories that were then stressing race, class, and materialism could be surpassed. Likewise, Baudelaire himself edited the Journal of Wagner Studies. Wagner wrote 5 volumes of prose before he composed his most important music in The Ring of the Nibelung. Wagner destroyed the classical tradition from Bach to Mozart and Beethoven. His concept of total artwork, Gesamtauskunstwerk, integrated huge numbers of little themes by combining theater, poetry, and music into a holism inspired by the people, its myths, its songs, and its moral foundations. Some of these concepts were taken up by Weber and Durkheim, but it was Levi-Strauss who explicitly codified cultural content, including myths, in his 4-volume work on mythologique. Production, social relations, focused on producing goods and service, remained the foundations, nevertheless, of most social scientists, especially those of Marx, but not only. We're proposing not to abandon these, but rather to enrich them, to contextualize and reframe them. For us, the scenes include fields, worlds, and network elements, but the most decisive is to add more explicitly aesthetics and values. This was refused, especially after 1968, when many social scientists said studying culture would, quote, blame the victim, unquote. But when William Julius Wilson, the distinguished African-American sociologist, later reversed his position on this, it has been slowly changing others as well. Cities are an ideal way to lead the social sciences here. And I would say this as a lifelong adult resident of Bronzeville, where I'm active in civic groups and learn every day. The molecular aesthetic, or toward a periodic table of cultural elements. What might a periodic table of cultural elements look like? It would start not with chemicals and discrete pieces of aesthetic sense, but with discrete pieces of aesthetic sense like tradition, transgression, or neighborliness. And since the same analytical dimensions are potentially present in, try to get this to be able to work here. In all empirical scenes, but vary in intensity, these qualities can and should be isolated from each other. Every pure ideal typical quality, local authenticity, transgression, self-expression, has its own concepts and character. An empirical city or neighborhood is a unique combination of multiple abstract dimensions of scenes. How to identify these deep structures of scenes? We chose an intermediate path resulting neither from simple theory nor empiricism. There is rather a range of sources from the world of culture. These have been developed from centuries of poetries, novels, cultural theory, and philosophy. And although they do not form a closed system, these 15 deep structures correspond to the chemical elements. We call this table our grammar of scenes. Levi-Strauss built his mythologique explicitly from Wagner for his basic grammar of mythological elements, but he added context that we extend. A similar sensibility is found in some classics of sociology, such as Weber's ideal types like Protestant ethic or overseas Chinese merchant, Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, of course, for the urban work, rural urban styles, the 5 pattern variables of Talcott Parsons, the work they work in the same basic analytical method. Our 15 dimensions are explicitly general to permit combining them globally into multiple empirical scenes. And we've sought out expert global collaborators to combine generally with local knowledge. Scenes analysis is thus a product of many of us collaborating over almost 2 decades, as illustrated in the PowerPoint. specifics here. This type of scenes analysis starts from certain basic components. I'm going to the type of, for us, the scene includes first geographic districts of a neighborhood or zip code rather than the city as a, or nation, to capture more numerous, precise, deeper local differences and find more extreme cases to present and allow their comparison. We seek to highlight the materiality, second, of physical structures, such as discos, shopping centers, to anchor in venues, concrete gathering places. Third, persons, people described in terms of ethnicity, social class, gender, into the analysis to account for next specific activities, such as young tech workers attending a punk concert, and the fact of analyzing these in a way that the elements of a combination unite with each other makes it possible to draw a more accurate portrait of a scene. Each combination expresses the symbolic meaning through the values that define the experiences offered by a place. We highlight three in terms of dimensions: legitimacy, theatricality, and authenticity, and then 5 variations of each of these, 15 dimensions in total. Finally, scenes have a public character. They're accessible to ordinary passersby who watch and can leave. Like Levi-Strauss, we use not a few, but hundreds of elements to create the scenes, the way he created the myths and variations. So he numbered these, hundreds and hundreds of them. Postal codes are the smallest generally available units around the world. There are over 40,000 in the United States alone. European and Asian countries have similar classifications, which promotes international comparison. To find this powerful micro data, it's necessary to study in depth the unpublished electronic archives, hitherto unseen. Thus, we're among the first social scientists, even the first urbanist, to my sad surprise, after we've been talking about this for a couple of years, to exploit these kinds of electronic data. We also use the electronic yellow pages with hundreds of different categories, types of restaurants, churches, hunting and fishing camps, and more. Third, social media and the new internet sources add more options continually. And many others that I'm not mentioning, but we bring in. And then the techniques by which we convert these millions of bits of data, raw data, into scenes dimensions for each neighborhood are illustrated in the PowerPoint and publications. We also use photographs and case studies of dramatic instances, and with many collaborators, students, and others who go deeply into something that they know with great interest and depth. We seek to achieve the subtlety of artists, but retain the coherence of scientists. Naive, less so than it was in the past. Lots of changes are happening. Does this approach break with much previous work on culture and the arts, much of social science? We're now living with changes comparable to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution, but more complex and subtle. The scenes are emerging as a concept from the transformations of 68 and 89, increased education linked to global migration, the internet, new cultural ideals, but these are not universal. Specifics vary by small neighborhoods around the world. Recognizing these disparities, since around 2000, culture has become one of the most popular subfields in social science among young persons in Europe and the US. It's essential for cultural policy in countries with a strong central government like France and China. Dominant hierarchy is assumed in the strong statements of Michel Foucault, Jean Baudrillard, or Pierre Bourdieu. This illustrates the residue of the past, especially Roman law, the hierarchy of Napoleon, which so dominated intellectual life for centuries, and in Asia, the dominant state. New themes like egalitarianism, gender roles, the environment, the enormous interest in consumption and the lifestyle challenge these classic themes. We've schematized these major changes with the new political culture, which I'll go back up to that briefly. Where are we here? There we go. As listing some of the big factors changing the dynamics within which specific cities and other things work. As well as in 10 books on scenes with our collaborators that I listed there, which include some of the major points. The new political culture is enough of a drastic change from the classic left-right ideological domination of culture for almost 2 centuries. Why is the perspective of the scenes new and relevant? Look back to around 1800, Parisian leaders then banned heavy industries when they realized they made smoke. We don't want smoke in Paris. How survive then? A new dynamic was theorized by Benjamin, who added the flaneur as a cultural engine. Arcades transformed shops into scenes. This was rediscovered as we enter a post-industrial world. The aesthetic prism is no longer limited to gentlemen with top hats on the boulevard. Democracy and egalitarianism join technology and the smartphone and music. Clothes and tattoos are strong markers of identity that can reinforce and sometimes counter or be irrelevant for race, class, sex, and ethnicity. Well, the hierarchy of whether arts and political movements that focus on a bohemian or anti-hierarchical give way to pluralism and issue specificity, this appears in the cultural relativism. The bottom box here of cultural relativism, with more social and cultural tolerance in the development of art forms and subtypes. Some popular groups now use over 100 categories to define their music, from blues to house. We should learn to be as subtle as they. 1968 was not a Marxist revolution. It did not abolish capitalism. Some therefore interpret it as empty. Still, it was a revolution of culture, aesthetics, equal participation, democracy, and identity, and has led to new social movements and to the political correctness, so-called, of the current political and cultural scene. Some 60 to 70% of Europeans, North Americans, and Japanese support these major elements of the new cultural policies in gender, racial tolerance, human rights, and the like. This lives on in the charisma of street scenes reinforced by international media, from the Arab Spring to the events in Kiev in 2013 to Hong Kong in 2021. Scenes globally, let me scroll down here a little bit more as we go through some of these. So if we have the 15 dimensions, how can we use them? I'll show some of these while I'm talking in a continuing way, and you can read separately from what I say. Consider scenes globally. We took 2 big ideas from North American and European thinking about how do innovations occur. And the 2 big ones were the Tocquevillian proposal that citizen participation brings legitimacy and trust. And second, from Baudelaire and Balzac, that bohemia fuels innovation. These are both French-inspired theories, but they failed when we first tested them in China, Korea, and Japan. 18 participants of the Scenes Project then examined them for almost a decade, resulting in a more subtle reformulation that integrates the arts into the global dynamics. The book is entitled Can Tocqueville Karaoke? So asking if we can take in the title these kinds of ideas. As decentralization and collegial engagement are essential for both theories, we develop a more holistic theory by formulating the specific cultural context. The rise of the arts is decisive. How can the arts and culture transform politics, the economy, and social life? This was a highly controversial result, which I worked up with Peter Achterberg as we took the data of Putnam and reanalyzed it by specific issue areas. And Putnam is right for most kinds of participation, but he's wrong for the traditional, for the arts, music and cultural activities. This has tripled in the Netherlands and doubled in the US in these years, although it is flat in France, or almost, well, it's gone up a bit, but not much in France. What are the implications of this for what we're doing around the world? And this is not just these three, these are some of the other leading countries from the World Values Survey in the same period. Delta is the percent change. Is this a sick cycle, or is this a more transformative sectoral pattern? If we look at these items from, look at this little number down here of 1939, from 1939 to present, we don't see any dips in business cycles. We see a near linear pattern in the rise of leisure and hospitality, the category from the US Census, which is closest to this kind of thing. First of all, what are the implications of this more generally? First of all, citizens are oriented toward the arts and culture, showing a significant growth. B, citizen values have more impact on many political systems with a spread of new global organizations. Like political systems, recent economies have been transformed by subject-specific niche markets. The iPhone generation label is a good example. Detailed studies by the French Ministry of Culture document a strong growth among young people in electronic cultural activities. And I'll mention the degree to which these themes of engaging the arts and scenes to think about cities in a more direct way, to analyze and to build them through working with planners, with individual cities, with arts groups, with city councils across China, led some 350,000 to participate in the first sessions last summer of the Scenes Academy there. And they've published over 150 papers already, papers and books. This is our main book on with the most elaborated aspects of the ideas, with data, however, less elaborated for other countries, which is in other works, which I'll come back to. But I'll just flip through some of the big findings which come out better here on the PowerPoint than they do with the text. One question is, how do we deal, or how may we transform or transcend inequality, a classic sociological theme? And so when we look at specific scenes, we find that God, yoga, and karate are among the themes which join people most across income occupational class type lines. So is pop culture and martial arts, or R, I should say. So the Karate Kid has engaged people of many different social backgrounds in Western Europe and the US, even though these came from Asia. Arts buzz is a related concept which comes from the scene as a key symbolic resource analogous to power and money and trust, and can be converted to and from these other kinds of resources. It's a means of having impact which can sometimes be more important than money or power. Where does it come? Where does it work especially well? This view shows that the Beaubourg Center attracts more visitors than the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre combined. And we consulted for 3 years with the city of Paris, Steve Sawyer and I, and others, and developed several Parisian examples, which I'll sketch here. How strong is revenues? These are the high income revenues in the green areas on the left. Individual amenities map overlap to that to some degree. Glamour, of the 15 dimensions, glamour overlaps it most strongly. But if we go and keep going and look for other dimensions, look at the legend, exhibitionism, glamour, or charisma, we find that in Spain, these tend to work more strongly, but they're weakly in the other countries. Was Bourdieu Spanish? Egalitarianism, Bobo, Marseille theater, studied by Maxime Jaffray, includes one which is explicitly oriented toward immigrant audiences. And that if one looks at differences by French cities, Paris does not have this association with immigration and concentrating certain activities with the neighborhoods the way Marseille does. So there are important differences between major French cities. Marta Klokotko has documented this beautifully in a number of works in smaller middle-sized towns in Poland.
America.
Yeah, I could wind up in just a minute or two, and so I'm just going through the end of these rapidly to give you a flavor of scenes in my native Bronzeville, where I'm working on a report right now in the last 6 months called Bronzeville Soul. Theaster Gates won the award from the Venice Biennale as the most important artist in the world. He's building low-income projects with success on a small basis, inspired by ideas very similar. He came up independently with what we're doing on scenes. We start with these kinds of things as raw data. And then if you look at Catholic churches, you can see that Chicago is a very Roman Catholic city. We're not a Tocquevillian city. And these differences nationally are just shown here. Now, I'm giving you more of a flavor of the kinds of analysis you can do rather than trying to introduce each of them one by one. But these are the ways you can get from these big abstract concepts to specific indicators. And you can do this without doing all the stuff we did. I mean, you could do this with matching up on a small basis. These are the neighborhoods where these different dimensions like neighborliness and self-expression. And in my South Side neighborhood, people say they are neighborly. In the North Side, they are self-expressive, dramatic differences. But when we measure charisma, and then we say what associates with charisma in the three largest US cities, Chicago is very different from New York and LA. In Chicago, you have to be traditional, egalitarian, and neighborly to be charismatic, such as for a city council member to be elected. By contrast, in New York and LA, you need to be glamorous and self-expressive. Big differences we'd never seen before like this. Drivers of growth, how do these variously work? Again, I'll qualify. None of these are deterministic for sure. Create a multiply, square any one of these, and they're not all that strong, but we're doing about as well as all other social scientists and adding a bit. Diversity, and then this is the background, if you will, of the populist political leaders of Macron, Trump, Brazil, and so forth. These dimensions we capture of scenes have grown in every one of the last 5 presidential elections in the US with party voting. People are not voting by class and race to the degree they did in the 1990s. These scenes elements are transforming where people live and where and how they vote. And there's a growing overlap between scenes and politics shown by this rise. Coding, how we coded them, neighborhood effects, bohemia, bobos, glamour drives job growth as well in ways. The #1 driver of job growth, when we saw this helped me move to study the arts. The #1 driver of job growth in these years in all US zip codes was the number of arts jobs in the first time period. Education was second, insignificant crime, cost of living, and county population size. That's dynamite. So a self-expressive scene enhances the impact of technology clusters on the economy. So technology matters, but making it in a self-expressive way heightens the impact. Where and why are these differences strongest? The arts drive jobs. But if we go, well, yeah, I'll just keep here. The arts tend to drive jobs in the red spots. The blue spots, it's the other way. The arts are less drivers than driven. So the arts are less salient, presumably in the blue areas, which fits with what we know about the general. That is, I'd say I'm pleased it does fit the normal wisdom. The Parisians love to make maps and to make them with lots of colors. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that we could capture. Here are the books from some of the other scenes participants. And this was the end. So I will stop there and look forward to discussion with you. Thank you. Why don't we
Thank you
stop
so
here?
much.
When Mio? Okay, I apologize for using a video here with you, but it's the fastest way to give you a quick, more articulated, written out statement than having you read the whole book or the 12 books or having me try to speak more spontaneously. But I'm here for discussion, and let's start with some discussion that any of you may want to suggest, throw in, challenge, linking to your papers or anything else we've covered in the course.
I can jump in, and I think that the idea of a scene is particularly helpful for my project, especially when I conceptualize the workplace as a specific scene and how many of the people that I'm talking to seem to be resisting the norms and strictures that come with that type of scene. And it makes me think of like, especially the emotional norms, a la like Arlie Hochschild, emotional labor embedded in that type of scene. So I think it's a helpful framework for me.
Okay. And I guess I would simply add I would use workplace in plural rather than singular. Because if your work has been being a policeman in dangerous neighborhoods, that's a very different pattern than working for Microsoft, where you wear your carabiners to work and you carouse with the other people, even in the office, and so etc. So thinking both what you did before in a different kinds of offices or jobs, which may not be in an office at all, maybe in an airplane or running running across the desert, which the US Army used to advertise as being an individual running across the desert with a US Army uniform. Okay, that came in the era of Bill Clinton, when the Army transformed itself into self-expression and individuality, explicitly hiring advertising and marketing people to do that. And it's part of the Army for sure. Okay. Anyone else on these kinds of linkages, say, between workplaces and maybe new scenes, which you may explore? I guess the obvious point is, as we have more higher education, fewer traditional heavy-duty working activities, more intellectuality and aesthetics within our work activities, like the Microsoft example, this leads to the weakening of the older models of society that we started with, and which I showed you. We had two page tables to go from feudalism to class, to unions, to civic groups, to new social movements, to new social movements, and at the end are scenes. So the idea is that even new social movements like the women's movement is a hierarchy if it's the National Organization for Women that has a membership list, that you pay dues, it has a board of directors. That's a hierarchy. And I talked how the Chicago director of NOW did not do what they did in Washington. She didn't do big ideology about gender equality. She talked about answering the phone calls. So there are lots of variations within even these radical organizations. The Proud Boys are an organization, a formal organization. A scene instead is what you might have had in front of the Congress with Trump there, where we're saying, to describe this scene, you can use maybe 200 dimensions, 300 dimensions. And that's what we're doing in illustrating how you can do this. So think not of, that's the big point from Wagner and Levi-Strauss. Don't think about 1, 2, 5, or even 30 variables. Think about hundreds of variables, even if they're semi-conscious or unconscious and we don't articulate them. They're there. Okay. More. And that's what you can get with a novel, with a movie, with poetry, an ethnographic report is often summarized as the quotations from individual speakers. I mean, even the most subtle, like Goffman, usually don't get much beyond that. We can go way beyond that now, building on the sources and approaches that I'm now pointing out. Okay. I also wanted to let it run, even though it was, maybe it may have, I hope it didn't put you all totally to sleep, but I wanted to let you see snippets of lots of things which I can't easily tell you in words, and it's easier to show those in a PowerPoint with a brief commentary. So there's a lot of stuff in there. And I say that having spent 12 years with a lot of smart people doing 10+ books. And the Chinese are the most amazing right now, and every couple of weeks we're having a Scenes Academy meeting. There are 30+ people doing PhDs and papers. There are 150 Chinese papers. And the rest of the world is behind China in recognizing and putting scenes after we had a PowerPoint. It wasn't like this. It was a little more targeted about China, but it was adopted in the 5-year plan a couple of months ago. So,
Yeah, so if it's okay, I think I would share like some thoughts that came to my mind when hearing about scenes and my current research on diplomats. And so right now I'm looking at the diplomat as a cosmopolitan, and with that comes this like competence to navigate foreign cultures. And so hearing about these scenes, but also having listened to a couple of interviews, I feel like that the exposure to certain types of scenes and the foreign culture has a big influence on, or could have a big influence on the diplomats' ability to navigate that foreign culture. Because in my interviews, there have been a lot of diplomats talking about going to the local markets. So that's like one of their first favorite activities when they arrive in a new country, and they say it helps them like get a feel like for what this country is about. Or a lot of them are talking about the neighborhoods they live in, which are usually really privileged neighborhoods, and they're going at it with like a very kind of objective point of view. They are aware that if they were regular people, they would probably not be living in these kinds of neighborhoods. But then it makes them also reflect on what kind of country they're living in. And also like church, that's how they use church to find connections. And so I feel like there's a lot of scenes involved in them trying to get this ability to navigate through this new place that they're put in. And that's just, yeah, so that's where my thoughts are right now.
a point you made explicitly, which I'll just make more general, is one individual can easily walk in and walk out of any scene. It's not like your parents' education or income or class or gender. There's a choice element which is huge in the scene concept. And that relates to the changes that we've experienced in the last 10 to 20 years. This has just gone so much further. If you talk about Adorno's essay on Hollywood versus social media like the Proud Boys, which you can choose to join or follow because you want to make sense of them or you hate them or whatever. But people can come in and out of these things called scenes. And that is more consistent with the Occupy movement, with Kiev, with Hong Kong. You didn't have to protest in Hong Kong. You could stay home. Most people stayed home. But the choice to go out and which demonstration you might participate in a Hong Kong protest or in Kiev or Miramar now, these are, not to mention, of course, Israel versus the Arab sections of Israel now, Jewish versus the Arab. I mean, these are hot issues in our lives, but to make sense of them and who is angry or afraid or driven enough to show up in a demonstration, and many people get killed. Miramar, this is amazing bravery of these people in Miramar, etc. So the diplomats in that sense are more privileged, but they often, because they know that, they will try to do things that will get them away from their gated communities, and they can participate if they want, and they may well with their children, but where and how much clearly is a choice, a bigger choice element than was true in more closed social arrangements. Taylor, do any of your online participants talk about something like a combination or two or three, that is, instead of saying, I will be with my grandmother and I will have to take care of her at her home, instead of just seeing that as post age 35 retirement, how many talk about, I wanted to retire in order that my life can include many, many, many different kinds of scenes that I can choose whenever I want. How much is that choice element a central part, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's huge. It seems to be like the primary driver, actually, the ability to choose how to spend one's time in a variety of scenes. I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, in a variety of scenes, especially since a lot of the jobs that they're resisting involve one scene, right? One kind of monotonous scene. Yeah.
Okay, and that's a big point, that many, if you just talk about diversity and you say, I'm a Black person, you're ignoring the many, many other statuses and scenes that a Black person can move in or out of, some of which can be explicitly highly racist and violent, others of which may be the opposite, and so forth and so forth. And we as individuals, big point, combine, and Robert Merton talked about the status set. We can talk similarly about the scene set that an individual can join, and you could think of maybe mapping in the last year, which of the following, what are the scenes where you've spent this amount of time? And these can be either the exact scene or in the terms of a zip code or smaller, or they can be type of scene, such as with my family versus not with my family, or with my workplace companions, which the karaoke goes late into the night in ways that if you leave your workplace and immediately go to an ethnic neighborhood, which is not related to the workplace, and then go to your family, those are three very different scenes. And so where individuals variously combine these has generally been left out of the discussions of such things as are labeled for political organizational purposes, like feminism and discrimination in the current discussions of diversity. Am I wrong? Are there any examples where people may talk about any sort of area, say that those of you working on feminism in China or on nationalism in China, for instance, do you recall explicit sort of combinations of these kinds of components, the 15 dimensions or something like that, that can that characterize individuals in ways that are now changing, or they want to change? So for instance, feminism can be, I don't want to just be with my husband or my children all the time. I want to be able to change the scene and be with people who are doing lacrosse or horseback racing or hunting, in the jungle. Are those kinds of things mentioned by Chinese feminists?
Professor, I had two questions. The first one is that, how can we use the Sing theory to understand the internet? So is the internet or online communities a thing in our society? And my second question is that how can we measure the individual choices? For example, that he or she moves in or moves out a thing. How can we measure that? Just from his action, or we made a survey to know his choices?
When you say Hayes, you mean H-I-S, or are you using a different English word? Hayes choices. What's the, you mean his or her choices?
Yeah, his or her choices, individual choices. How can we measure such choices change? So from taking nationalist movement as an example, that currently people choose to I say they move from a like straight demonstration thing to the online community, if online community can be viewed as a thing. So how can we measure such a shift?
Yeah, this is, I mean, the simple answer is it's a data problem, that if we have a one data source which includes these, which includes, let's say, a common identification code, like a zip code or a neighborhood, or in China, it can be a personal individual code for your passport or something, then you can merge the data. But most countries don't permit such direct, precise matching of individuals with locations or with other census data like moving. But the data are there. That is, if we had full information which could permit, it's now restricted because the government wants to preserve anonymity, for instance. But it's not that it can't be done. So I would say you can do it on a qualitative exploratory basis in your MA. For instance, looking for ways that people may say, the nation of China is powerful, important for me, and I am more nationalist because I don't have to live in just a small island like Japan. I can have deserts, I can have mountains, I can have sea. And so things like the American national anthem will talk about those characteristics of America, and which are shared by China in this example. And they're not found in a Japan, or they're not found in a smaller, more homogeneous country. So my quick answer, it's more a data question than a conceptual question. But then if we get the data, what are the ideas we can use to analyze this? This is nearly a revolution because we've got so many data. The way I put it, the more data we have, the more you realize how much more you need theory. And we need both together. Big data alone is no good. Theory alone is untested. But if we try to combine the two, we can have more powerful results, including surprises in the results, as we did with the arts. I mean, I wasn't working on the arts before I started this stuff. I could enjoy it, but I didn't use Wagner or anything like that in my classes or research. Is that too vague a question, or is that? So I think that what I've also done with the example, maybe I'll just point out, is I've stressed more explicitly, think explicitly in your research design, what is the unit of analysis? Or can we use multiple units of analysis to test the same big idea? For instance, women do more cooking. And does that lead to more sensitivity to smell and to taste aesthetics, which women may have more than men, for instance? If you take that as a proposition, you could look at that with national data, with zip code data, with individual data. But whether and why and how much depends more on how easy it is to get access to any one of these, or then how you can combine across these levels, plus taking a woman who may be cooking and then asking what other things does she do in her life. And so if you work in a job where you have to smell perfume, maybe that perfume job heightens your sensitivity to the sensual and the aesthetic in perfumes in ways that you can talk about the 25 elements in one perfume in ways that most people, especially people who don't wear perfume, cannot and do not. But in a sense, I've taken a simple proposition. Some gender, some jobs lead to more aesthetic sensitivity, and then combined the scenes or the workplace or leisure places where one person can join these in, or can potentially have aesthetic aha experiences by saying, aha, this combination of whiskey and asparagus reminds me of that perfume. Or kimchi. Kimchi is Chinese nationalism. I heard a BBC summary of the nation of South Korea, and it listed 5 characteristics of what's distinctive about South Korea, and one was kimchi. So that's the problem. Both the Chinese and the Koreans want kimchi. Okay. All right, it's 6:03. Let's take a break, reconvene, and we can have a bit of discussion, and then we can talk about papers. 15 minutes, 6:03. I gave a gender example with the perfume and the food, and the food's a good example, and you can have dozens and dozens of components of one dish in front of you that are days. I mean, if you, and things may come in packages and then you put together packages and you cook it. But these are analogous in a sense to scenes, and that is to the Wagnerian leitmotifs that generate the composite artwork, which is the food in front of you, which is the favorite topic of photographs for the Chinese. And there's a finding that women have a more developed olfactory sensitivity than do men. So what's the cause, and how much this comes from generations or hundreds of years of differences in exposure or whatever? We don't know, but there may be some Darwinian adaptation. But what I'm getting at with this example is that you can start with simple categories like Chinese national, or man, or woman, or black or white. Even that's a pretty loose label. And then what the scenes idea that is getting to these, not just the 15 dimensions, but going down to the hundreds or whatever else people can come up with in the way of big data in the years to come. I mean, nobody imagined 20 or 50 years ago that we would have this kind of big data we do now. And we may well have far more if we combine all kinds of other things. You mentioned, Lena, for instance, going to markets. There's a Chinese study called the China Report, which surveys the markets in hundreds of the individual counties of China, and shows with related data that the residential patterns and the food patterns go back hundreds of years. And this is found in the physiological makeup of the individuals from their health records. So the richness of this data in this one report, which is what led me to try out a vegan diet for years, is considered one of the best health demography ecological studies ever done in any country on any. It's a public health. It's the best thing in public health ever done. It's analogous in that sense to not only the Chinese nationalism, but combining the aesthetic of what do you want to eat, what do you want to smell like, or what can you or can you not even smell, but also showing that any one of these is often a composite of hundreds of others. Kimchi has many, 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 many components that can be there. Okay. So I'm simply showing with these analogs that this is life which you've seen and taken for granted in terms of chemistry, in terms of physics, in terms of biology. That, I mean, the human body, we keep discovering every few years more and more complications, all the things that are within our intestines, that are within our stomachs. I mean, they're within our brains, the neuroscience. It's just, there are whole new categories of variables that are being discovered every few years. And they're analogous in the sense that you can take simple proteins or simple vitamin B or B12 and then say that can be combined with things that fight against it, and it's in all of our stomachs, and how much of these combines with eating fish or not eating fish for a certain number of years will transform the way you in turn smell other things. So I mean, that's the kind of thing that biologists are working on. And scenes in that respect is, I mean, I've given a 1 sentence, 2 sentence summary of scenes, and people say, hey, that's like the table of chemical elements. And I say, yes. So in that sense, it's part of science more generally, and we can ignore the scientific part. We can say, I only want to know, does it smell romantic or hatred? Is it gun smoke from a gun, and I have a huge hatred of guns? Is it rubber tires from a drag race? Or is it, what does it smell like? And so these are now, I mean, they make radio, audio, even 33 and old 33 and a third records of automobile races and the engines of different engines aesthetically listened to. Okay, with commentary. Listen to this Ferrari 12. Okay. Other comments on any of this?
I have a question. So thinking about, I mean, in my focus on the alt-right, I'm wondering to what extent scenes can be seen as an analogous to political frames, because I mean, a lot of these a number of these 15 cultural dimensions are also essentially ideological. And if they're internalized rather than perceived, could, for example, the alt-right be just a new combination of different units of political disposition or ideology? For example, traditionally you'd say, oh, these guys stormed the Capitol, or, they hate immigrants, whatnot. Far right, where it's more complicated than that, because a lot of these units are combining in very different and unexpected ways. For example, they combine, or at least they claim to combine, xenophobia, Western chauvinism with an ethnic multiculturalism of sorts, anti-racism at the very least. So I'm wondering if, even if I can't use the building blocks of scenes in particular, this Wagnerian composition of what a scene could be, could that also be applied analogously to a worldview, in a sense?
Yes, indeed, absolutely. And in a sense, that's what this whole course has been trying to show, to give you the building blocks, the components, the leitmotifs that you can combine in new ways, whatever you do hereafter. And then to give examples of having done this in Levi-Strauss or Goffman. But yes, I mean, this is a reference to the book, not explicitly being read, but we have read it in the earlier versions of this course by Irving Goffman, called Frame Analysis, which I talked about this last week with the two Theos. And I said it's a useful idea, but even though Goffman is a major sensitive analyst of these issues, my take on the book is that it's too elementary. He doesn't have enough of his subtlety, which is in some of his other work, presentation of self and everyday life and so forth. It's got more subtle things than the book. Okay, so, but absolutely yes is the answer, as well as in the efforts to classify from Parsons, from Marx, from others, Gertz, I'll just mention Gertz invokes in some of his more abstract essays in the second half of his career that the complexity of these things defies science. And I would say, you could say that the complexity of perfume sort of defies science if you only want to think in, what does it have a romantic or an aesthetic reaction? Yes, but certainly you can do a lot with chemistry and biology to analyze the olfactory senses and how they may be variously combined. And the whole wine industry, the film industry, the sauces that the French spent, decades, centuries updating and so forth. And what goes into kimchi are examples that all of you know. So, and you can, I guess a further point is you can use these at any level of sophistication. You could say, this is a strong perfume, this is a very gentle perfume, or this is a strong macho statement in this baseball cap I'm wearing, and where I'll wear a different t-shirt to combine with it. Is this economics or is this aesthetics? 2 days ago, there was an announcement that the so-called preppy shop called J. Crew, it was bankrupt, and they're hiring a new guy who has a mohawk haircut down the middle of his head and who wears casual shoes and a scruffy beard, not a beard, it's a 5-day growth, whatever. He's the new chief designer to try to completely remake J. Crew to bring it out of bankruptcy. So this was written on the business finance section of the Wall Street Journal. Okay, so my simple point is, what's business and what's aesthetics? They're deeply interpenetrated today. What we can do is have a discussion where we can talk about individual papers, and I'll look again. Do we have something from Lena? Did you manage to flag what's new in your statement? I don't see it in my email.
Right, yeah, I was able to do that. Sorry, I didn't.
You want to send it to me, and then maybe you could, even if you want, if you could send one to me, I'm slower than you folks. Then you could put it on chat. You can upload it to chat, and then everybody else can look at it if that's all right for you. But does anyone else have questions on papers? I think Teo, you said, Lena, are you want 3 minutes to start that, and maybe let Teo, you've always got good ideas and questions. You want to lead off with another? and I'm only calling on him because the rest of you have been silent, but we can have discussion of any theme by any person in any paper or whatever. Teo, anything smaller and simpler? More specific variation? Like how to put these together in the Proud Boys? Which of these dimensions are masculinity? That's a simplistic leading question.
Yeah, and Teo and I were actually chatting about the importance of, or the prevalence of, tradition and transgression in slightly different ways in both of our projects. In my case, there's this very strong desire, almost an embodiment of tradition in this desire for a traditional family settling down, a traditional man's role. You know, one of their main ideological points is that they venerate the housewife, et cetera, et cetera. And Teo suggested that it was similar for his. But on the other hand, in my case, there's also the transgressive strain, which is, you know, which really makes up a lot of their identity, has to do with an opposition to what they consider the liberal, politically correct establishment. So a lot of what the Proud Boys do and what their it's actually in the name. So their pride comes from this transgression, this opposition to mainstream liberalism, and, you know, the suggestion that, you know, we could pass over slavery and that they could say the N-word and all sorts of slurs, and that that's not really an issue, and that they're not racists, and they can peddle in stereotypes without, you know, they should be able to peddle in stereotypes without worrying about being canceled. And so that's the really big transgressive strain there. But then there's much more that goes, you know, they're exhibitionists as well. So if I'm taking the cultural dimensions from scenes, because they wear matching polos and they like to be seen, and they're loud and boisterous and whatnot. And I don't know, Teo, do you want to add a bit about how I feel like the people we study aren't quite the same, but they do overlap, and there'd be a very, very good Venn diagram that could be drawn.
Yeah, I think a lot of what the other Teo said applies to the community I'm looking at as well, especially sort of the appeals to like a traditional image of sort of a 1950s family structure. But then that also contrasts in a lot of ways with like a simultaneous discussions of that are more like transgressive discussions of sexuality, and often very misogynistic discussions of sexuality involving where there are discussions of like picking up women or strategies for picking up women. So there's sort of a strange tension in the traditional and transgressive aspects of the community.
Okay. Good points, all. I had one other. Oh, quick comment. Some of your precise references go back to the 1950s family, but your point about the social aspect of liberalism is really much more visible and central with the new political culture. It's much more recent to have, I mean, even fighting racism was new in the US in a serious way only after World War II, when racial covenants, which said you will not sell your house to an African American, and they called them Negroes or whatever else at that point. Hyde Park had racial covenants in the 1940s. They were abolished in the late 40s and 50s. And in the 50s, they were abolished nationally. But that's just a simple example, not to mention discrimination on more subtle things like Lithuanians versus Ukrainians, or Ukrainians versus Russians, or Russians versus Kazakhstanians, or whatever. That all of these have been tried to be measured on with social distance scales by sociologists and market researchers. And certainly when we get to say themes of masculinity, the whole advertising and marketing areas, such as jeans, what type of jeans to wear with what type of t-shirt, with what type of beard, with what type of model, what kind of hairstyle on the model. I mean, there are billions of dollars are spent on this all the time. So it's, even if we may have a crude label like macho more or macho less, the fashion magazines around the world don't just take one thing. And I saw this more as well in Korea. Well, I'll mention that the army experience includes a glamorous side in Korea with the military. It's sort of an aristocratic carryover of the military having a gentlemanly, elegant, aristocratic ethos. So these are each varied elements of gender roles, which we could almost say each individual can do, to some degree, reconstruct or revise in any way they so choose. How much they so choose and how much is imposed, obviously, is a big ideological framing question. But that too varies. It's not as if it's right or wrong. There are differences by neighborhood, by income, by education, by et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just ticking these off, not to say these are yet precise data that we may have available, but they at least are things that you can see could be analyzed. And one thing which it's fine to do in a master's paper is to say, here are 15 hypotheses that I've come up with by reading Goffman and reading my postings on Kimchi. And I will not be able to test more than 3 of these, but I nevertheless wanted to put them out as an analytical framework, with which they hold together and have a rationale for being present together. And then we can ask, how much does, say, the definitions of the military, which I mentioned in the Bill Clinton years. Yeah, the theme, the brief label was an army of one. An army of one could be you, and they had television advertisements of people running across the desert, you know, with your gun or whatever, all there. But you were totally individualistic, running across the desert with the sunrise and so forth. And you were part of the army, but you were acting and living alone as well. So that kind of transformation of the normal marching in step together as being the definition of military happens all the time. Okay. Any more thoughts on, and that is those of you working, that is, both these guys are working on gender, anti, pro, different let me add as well, which of these do you want to focus on, and how conversely is feminism or different women's traditional gender roles variously interpenetrating your male gender roles? I'll just throw in one more, which I've been reading recently. This is William Faulkner. This is about a young man whose father was murdered, and and then what should he do about his father being murdered? His Aunt Jenny, who's a traditional Southern woman, is arguing. She does not arguing. She just listens to the younger wife, widow of the man who was murdered, who is absolutely going wild and says, here are the 2 revolvers. Take revenge. This is an issue for traditional Southern gentlemanly firing against each other. This was the 1930s. People still fought duels, at least in the 20s. And in my neighborhood, the gangs are fighting duels. Duels go back a long way. Homer. So where and how these elements are combined have been discussed ever since Aristotle wrote his essays on one essay, not very long, on aesthetics and the arts. And his main examples are Homer. So but within Homer alone, you get all kinds of different gender roles for men and for women. And the battle, I'll just quick summary is that the battle between the family and the neighborhood versus the individual doing well is articulated by 2 of the leaders, men, and they both choose individual pride rather than even being able to live with Helen of Troy. So even though the Trojan Wars were fought over the pride, if you will, of Helen or other men's pride in Helen or related to Helen, these were not fought over substructure and superstructure. Okay. Lena, why don't we let you, or wait, yeah, here we go. Let me open up. I've been talking too much. Let me open what you've sent. And we've got a comparison, and I'll open this. Do you want to introduce this a little bit for us as we're looking at it?
Okay, sure. So yeah, so I like kind of tried to incorporate Professor Clark's feedback and try to find.
Sure, let me interrupt. So stop. What if we look at this text? The first sentence is what is to be explored. Is that new or old?
Which one did you open the comparison?
Yeah, I've opened the comparison file. The very first line of, I just need to know what's new and what's old. And then below that, there's something which is marked in yellow.
Oh yeah, so the yellow, so that's new. So
So what
and the yellow, it like transferred also my own highlighting. So I just did like some highlighting on the text for myself to just kind of
but
organize.
The first line, what is to be explored? Is that new or old?
New.
Okay, very good. So the yellow are big themes. Are there
It's a long text, so you don't.
Okay, why don't you lead us through what you want us to talk about that would be helpful for you? So don't tell us things we sort of know already. Tell us things which are bothering.
I'm so sorry. Are we looking at a document? Are we?
Yes, you should be able to go to chat. I think I'll look myself.
In the Zoom?
Should I share it in the Zoom link?
Yeah, so
That's
you have not
possible.
shared it then yet?
I don't see anything yet.
Yeah, neither do I. So Lena, have you tried to upload your file to this chat?
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's what we need. Please. That's what I meant. I thought I'd asked you to do while the Teos were talking. But the Teos they're going to get another question if you can't get it ready. But that is
okay.
Think for yourself. That is, Lena, think for yourself now. What do you want us to focus on in what will be before us? You can lead this conversation, please.
Okay, so actually, I'm not sure how to like share it in the chat because it's just like a Microsoft.
Okay, can anybody advise us? Shall we click on File or click on the lower right-hand side, Save Chat, Merge to Meeting Window, File?
Or maybe if you shared screen.
Yeah, I mean, I can share screen if that's okay.
No, that's, well,
Well,
and Mio, you ought to know, do you know how to upload a file to chat? I thought I'd done this before, but I'm not sure. Can't be, but this generally it's pretty simple, straightforward kind of program. Yep.
Yeah, I think Lena, right now you can just share the screen, right?
I can if that's okay with everyone.
Give it a shot.
Okay.
That is the intermediate, just for the record, is to go via Dropbox or OneDrive. So you can upload from one box, but maybe not from your own computer.
Okay, so does everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, so the blue one is the combined document, which is new for the new. So that's all new. Yeah, so what I was kind of just trying to get, like, see if I was like going in the correct direction with this is trying to understand. So like I think I talked about this before, like a previous study on diplomats said that diplomats can express kind of 3 different attitudes towards the foreign culture. So they can be like ranging from like not getting involved at all to like being super into the culture. And so I'm trying to kind of explain that kind of level of cosmopolitanism with some of the ideas we have discussed in our course. So like the first one I'm doing is the theory of alienation and estrangement, which this other author has already discussed, specifically on the topic of diplomats by using the alienation theory of Marx. And then the other one I'm looking at is explaining the diplomat's degree of cosmopolitan competence using Parsons' cultural system and the aspect of the moral evaluative aspect in the social system. And then also I'm discussing solidarity using Durkheim's organic and mechanical solidarity to understand kind of the formation of a cosmopolitan identity. So that's kind of the summary. And yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering if if I'm going in the correct direction of like using these theories to explain something like this, if that's something that's possible. And
For sure, this sounds great. Show us how some specifics work.
Okay, so this is all like theoretical, but I do hope to incorporate maybe some examples of my own research currently, or the research that was performed where so right here I'm working through just like the theoretical aspect of cosmopolitanism, which is a concept which can be a competence, a process, a mindset, and an identity. And that's just like some, not specific to this course, but some characteristics. This is the Niederner-Kalthoff. She did the study where she identified like the 3 different types of being involved in the other culture. And so this is like my first kind of attempted explanation. So I guess, so this is kind of just like what this section is trying to do, is the using alienation to explain the cosmopolitan's kind of mindset, which is like this openness towards the other culture. And so I guess this is all crossed out.
Stop a second. I almost hear a proposition, maybe scroll back. I mean, is there, I'm trying to have you explicitly, you and everybody else be able to explicitly distinguish between a sort of vague discussion and a proposition, which A leads to B. That is this a definition or not, or is it a proposition?
Oh, so first, the first part is all definition, but here comes my proposition.
Okay,
So kind of like in one sentence, I think this is highlighted here. So the argument is that by the using, so first talking about this, just the estrangement in context of the diplomat, but then relating it to the estrangement of the cosmopolitan, and focusing on difference is kind of the I guess not conclusion, but kind of the result of this whole like section is that by being estranged from the other, the diplomats, so the diplomats in their position, they're already confronted with difference to like a much different degree than maybe people that like just stay put. And so this is like a good starting out point for reaching this cosmopolitan mindset, because by being estranged from the other, they see this, so they are able to identify difference, and then they are able to reflect on this difference by also reflecting on themselves, and this gives them a chance to move beyond the difference and recognize similarities, and by that they become more open. That's my proposition, if that makes sense.
this is
Maybe it's a little confusing.
no, it's fairly clear, fairly general, and an excellent general proposition. And we could potentially all, and maybe you're going to tell us about, say, 5 or 10 specific corollaries of this, more precise ways that this could work. But yes, this is to stress the contrast, learning how what is not like me and how I'm being confronted by something else can lead both to estrangement on a psychological level, and then to begin to talk about something like cultural diversity or relativism on the other, on a more social and cultural level. So yes, this is a great general statement.
And then I would like to go in here like into like more specific examples maybe. I just wrote something down just to not lose it, like this interview I had with one person where this was like clear, like really like great to identify, I guess. But then this next section where I kind of use Parsons is trying to understand this other idea of other factor present in cosmopolitans, which is cosmopolitan competence, which also was talking about the scenescapes. Maybe this could be a place where to put that also in, which is their ability to navigate other cultures. So this is my kind of explanation here, as I try to highlight it in this one sentence.
Okay, now this is perfect. Good stuff.
So I was like thinking that explaining their competence like depends on, first I was trying to think about it all about like the diplomat's culture, but then I realized maybe it's like good to look at the other culture where they're in, and depending on how much similarity is between the moral evaluative aspect of their own culture versus the one where they are currently located in or just have been in the past or whatever, the foreign culture, that kind of also determines their competence of navigating that culture. So I guess, yeah. So And then this third part of solidarity, I'm kind of not, this is where I'm at, but I can't really, I have difficulty like proving it more. So that depending on how the diplomat is tied to their own culture, if it's through like mechanic or organic, that also influences how the cosmopolitan feels towards the cosmopolitan identity. But I don't know how to, I don't know, maybe if there's where I can, I feel like this could be true, but I feel like I need more like
No, this is excellent.
backup.
Now, for example, we could say, if you are taking an example close to home, if you're on a website conversing and exchanging on a Twitter-like format about Chinese nationalism, if you have only examples from your village or your idealized rural Chinese town, that would be very different than if you said in the conversation, I am a strong Chinese patriot, but it's because of the great diversity, the width and breadth and depth of China make me more proud because we have merchant traders, we have strong military leaders, we have the best food in the world, we have the best programmers in the world and able to do this and do that. And it's all of the diversity of these many things that I find in China, which makes me more proud to be Chinese. Those are two very different kind of statements. And so the one might lead to, is kimchi Chinese or Korean? It could be more the first, whereas the second one could be, how many types of diverse forms of kimchi can we find in China, and how many more diverse forms can we find in Korea versus China? And so using diversity flows from your concept of cosmopolitanism in the kimchi or in the perfume or in the types of military engagement or in the types of definition of macho or feminine, versus the unitary image that there's only one way to be a woman, only one way to be a fighter in an army, and so forth. And so these are directly taken from Durkheim. These are correlations, corollaries of your more general idea taken from this general statement, which is pretty much here. And I'm simply sort of elaborating ways that you could add 5 or 10 more propositions, even if you have no original data, no data from anybody else. You don't need to feel that you must do so in this MA. You can still usefully spell out, corollary 1, 2, 27A, 27B, 27C in the way that Levi-Strauss did.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Or
Yeah.
Durkheim does not give us a village ethnographic study of a French village. He just talks about mechanical solidarity in general terms. Same thing. He doesn't talk about, who lives on what street in Paris. He just talks about the big city uses organic solidarity. So then he gets down to things, to other linkages like the professional association, which could be, do you have a degree in chemistry before working as a chef? And if you have a PhD in chemistry and then you work as a chef in a restaurant, you will know a lot more about cooking of food, temperature, combinations than if you've not had that degree. And that's a sort of professional association example from Durkheim. So all this looks great.
Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much, I was wondering if how the direction is going the right way, because I was just kind of exploring for the most part.
There's no one right way or wrong way. Nothing else.
Okay.
That's what you've learned in this course.
Okay.
Your own expression and your own building on your own subtle or not as subtle as you want paths are fine to explore and talk about right now in the minutes that we have remaining today. Anything else in your draft, Lena, that you want us to discuss, or are these the main points?
These are the main points. I would like to connect it to something more graspable, either out of like, I mean, even though you said there's no need to actually put in that data, but I would kind of make it more, because it's so like theoretical right now, kind of incorporate some either out of my study or the other person who already did a similar study out of her data. But yeah, I'm just trying to figure that part out right now, maybe, unless.
No, that's fine, but that's a question of how has someone presented their data with enough specificity that you can adapt it for your purposes, and that sometimes is possible, but that's the reason for doing your own original analysis. But doing original data analysis is a huge multi-year, often coming. What we did in Scenescapes, as I said, was 12 years with about 15 research assistants, new people every year for 12 years. And that was just in the US, and there are many more in other countries. So it's these are big, complicated. So making your choice and where and how to balance the sources and the data are fine, but there's no one right way. But I mean, you have thought about these issues creatively. You've read, you've distilled and put together the readings in the course with your own your own MA topic and with your own personal experience, and they're all present, and that's great. So cheers. Who else has suggestions or questions for your own paper or anything else on what we've discussed? Yeah, actually, let me just remind you, our agenda for next week is that everybody will present their papers. Remember that? It's the syllabus. So please, if you can prepare just the way Lena has done, but it's fine for you in the presentation to do what Lena has done here, which is to say, I don't know how to put this together with Durkheim, and to say that next week, and we can then discuss with you for each of your papers. Tell us about the things which are still troubling. Don't tell us the obvious basics that you've already discussed and that we all know. Tell us about what's bothering you and what you're having trouble with, including what the recipe is for kimchi that I'm sure, yeah. Wenmyo, have any of you or your people on your site cooked any kimchi yourselves? Or are you just talking about what the label is more generally and abstractly?
So you mean how they cooked kimchi by themselves?
Yes.
I don't know.
Okay.
We usually don't cook kimchi by ourselves. I mean, like most Chinese actually don't eat kimchi except those who live in north and east.
Okay, and that's fine. I'm only teasing you and the website participants to say we can work and experience these things at every level. And so you can do an MA with or without certain levels of detail. Or you can be ironic and say, here's what someone did. How can we interpret what this person did? And then go to your propositions to do so.
Professor, how long is the presentation? So like 15 minutes?
Yeah, well, we'll have the whole session really for that. Probably, I would say if you do what Lena has done, if you have your manuscript right here and you want to share it the way she has done, that's probably a good way to do it. And if you even want to underline some things that, or you could even use one color for big points which you feel are important, such as your 2 or 3 more general propositions, and then use another color for things where you have questions or you'd like to discuss it with us. That would be fine too. So a combination of color, marking, text, and you talking to us is probably best. And then we can have some discussion of each of these. And if we could even group the presentation, so we've got at least 4 of you dealing with issues of gender. That is two on feminization and feminist movements, 2 on sort of the male side of reactions, pro and con, and then so all of those would be good to all sort of put together and discuss some of these general as well as more specific components and how they may interact. Let me just say the wife in my example of the Faulknerian novel was a young woman who joined and fought in the Confederate Army herself. So she was there with the men, fighting, shooting her guns on the front. And then she married the colonel at the end of the war, etc. So it was a complicated gender role combination of statuses, widow, battle fighter, etc. Sister-in-law. Other questions or themes? How can we help you most in the next 10 minutes and in the next few hours next week? Any other thoughts or suggestions for how we handle this next week that would be most useful for you? Or a question as to how we might do it. That is, we've now gotten to know each other a lot better than we did at the beginning of the course, and I think we're learning from each other, and that's great. And then we see how this can either be hierarchical, village, tradition, or it can be self-expression, which is doing it individually, or it can be transgressive, that is also challenging and critiquing implicitly or explicitly the ways that was done in the past. So how could we combine any of these next week for you? Do we want to have a discussant? How about having, here we go. How about having at least you 4 share your papers with you, the rest of you 3 in advance, even if you've only got a rough outline, and then think of how do these dimensions of feminization or women's activities overlap with each other in the 2 more Chinese statements, and then these 2, what is there implicit or explicit about the conceptions of women in the Proud Boys or the, what's it called, the Red Pill? That is, you have, and let me throw out the deliberate creation of extreme versions for rhetorical purposes. That's pretty obvious, but think then maybe about how that gets specifically done, and what are the concrete examples that may be, in the case of the Proud Boys, you've even got a lawsuit in progress of how much are these framed statements about masculinity either politically acceptable or illegal, and may lead to, serious legal implications, going to jail, etc., or being accepted as a patriotic American? That is, what are some of the specifics that one could include? So that is, if you could each try to have something general, like the general propositions about cosmopolitanism that Lena showed us, at the same time also have some very concrete, I mean, lawyers do both, or they do especially do the very, very concrete. But if we can get some very, very concrete examples, that would be good, and to counter some of the more vague and abstract things as well. Maybe including some quotes, that is, try not to just paraphrase, try to give us some of the actual wording of people from your websites. For instance, I've said this several times to those of you who are using, and let me add, somehow people, I don't know if it's the Chinese are less used to doing this, but providing exact quotations from those people. Don't paraphrase yourself. That is, I read a lot of papers. I work with a lot of Chinese who tend to paraphrase, not realizing how critical the exact words of the speaker are to be able to convey. There's subtlety there, which we don't want to gloss over. So I'm trying to ask all of you to give us some specific subtlety.
Yeah, but I mean, like, but for example, like those in like Weibo or in Douban, such like online, I mean, social media websites, when they post or tweet, they use Chinese, but we need to translate Chinese into English. But when we translate, we actually paraphrase, because many Chinese, I mean, some buzzword in online community can't be translated word by word. I mean, they use some.
I would say stop, try to do so. Try to get it almost word by word. And then, you know, I had a course in France where we spent 6 months in the course on 3 pages of one poem. Remember the French, it's called the explication de texte. Don't just give us a rough idea that this is about nationalism. We know that. How does nationalism resonate in the minds and the discussions of your direct source? No abstract loose things, in their words, but then give us 2 or 3 possible translations of why kimchi is so important or whatever. But I'd say for this little bit, this is a good example. Find a way to use their words that you can translate it, and or even talk about the different potential meanings of a word, as you have done. I mean, you took a whole course in linguistics in order to learn how to do this with more subtlety. Use that course now in doing this. Who else for either questions or advice? That is, might we have, what I'm getting at, is there a way that we might ask some of you to be leaders in commenting on the others? That is, not just say it's me, but having each of you try to help one another in a way that would be most useful. So maybe, or for instance, maybe our 2 Chinese working on feminism in China could be commented on by the 2 Teos and vice versa. As you're all working with gender role definitions. Or how about the nationalism of the Chinese versus the cultural, the cosmopolitanism of the diplomat? So you were, in a sense, that a natural pair. So maybe you could try to comment on one another. What other combinations? Anybody want to suggest another commentator or discussant on each other's work?
Taylor actually has reached out to me because we do share similar ideas, because we are kind of touching on the work ethics issue. Taylor is on the US, I'm on the Chinese, even though
Yeah,
we are going from different angle. Yeah, that's kind of good like a overlap. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, that's perfect. Anybody else? So we covered most of you.
So, I mean, like Jiayi and I, we can be a pair, because actually both of us are working on the Douban website. So we're so we try to analyze the posts in Douban to respectively see how feminism and nationalism works in Chinese social media. So maybe Jia and I can work together.
In
Perfect.
which case Teo and I could
Perfect.
work together and maybe we could at the end discuss each other's more generally.
Excellent. Now, these are excellent. Based on just sort of thinking ahead a little bit of having done this a bit, some of you, any further follow-up suggestions that might be good to more generally follow?
I do have a logistic question. So I do want to submit a major empirical work, and I did incorporate our class reading into it. So you said in the syllabus, like I need to highlight 20 pages or so. Like, what do you mean by highlight? Can you clarify a little bit? Does it need to be continuous pages, so I can say, okay, page 5 to 10, 25 to 30?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you don't need to do anything different for this course from what you're doing for the MA thesis. I'd say try to do one thing well, and then you can just say, well, so I guess your question has two meanings. One is what you present in 10 minutes or so next week, and then what you want to tell me to focus on for the course. But so I said, tell me, for instance, if there's something which fits best to the course, which is 20 pages, which can be, 5 pages here and 15 pages there, and just say, you can just put it at the top of the text. But then second, I'm just saying this. Give me and give all of us. Be ready to put on the screen your whole MA draft, so you can scroll up and down if there's something on page, 42 that you want to be able to show us. Have it there on the screen as well, so you can scroll up and down. Does that make sense? But each of you can really lead us through your presentation orally when we're talking together. But if you have the whole thing there, you can say, here it is, but because a whole page of text is hard to read. So if you can make it, highlight a few bits with color, that would be great too. We left anybody out or any themes out? Okay, well, I look forward to your pulling it together orally on Tuesday, and then a few days later in writing, and then rewriting for the deposit of the MA. And let's hope you can lead to publication and extension and elaboration in future work. See you next week.
Could I stay
First,
for
I have a
a quick
question.
question
Oh, sorry.
as well?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
You could